The moment Jonah Reeve realized he had agreed to a blind date, he was standing in a quiet daycare hallway at noon, holding his son's tiny backpack in one hand and a half-crumpled permission slip in the other, feeling like life had just dared him to step into a world he had long closed the door on. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, warming the pale walls, yet his chest felt tight with the kind of uncertainty that comes when grief and hope collide. Jonah was a single father who had learned how to survive, not how to begin again, and whatever waited for him across that lunch table later that day was something he had not prepared his heart for. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and unexpected turns that change lives, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Touch. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. Jonah's life had become a careful routine shaped around daylight hours, school schedules, and the small, fragile world of his 6-year-old son, Caleb. Every morning began with sunlight slipping through the curtains of their modest apartment, the sound of traffic humming outside, and Jonah packing lunches while mentally counting expenses. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving behind memories that still felt too sharp to touch. Jonah had not fallen apart in the dramatic way people expected. Instead, he had folded himself inward, choosing responsibility over rest, consistency over comfort. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a community center, a job that paid just enough and demanded steady hands more than big dreams. During the day, he fixed broken locks, cleaned hallways, and repaired what others overlooked, quietly proud of being dependable even when no one noticed. The blind date was not his idea. It was suggested by Maribel, the center's volunteer coordinator, a woman with a kind smile who believed people healed better when they were gently pushed forward. She had seen Jonah's exhaustion, the way his shoulders slumped by late afternoon, the way he never stayed for lunch with co-workers. The favor was simple in theory. Her cousin had organized a daytime charity luncheon at a downtown cafe and needed one more attendee to balance the table. Jonah had agreed because saying no felt rude, and because it was easier to help someone else than to admit he was afraid of stepping back into something that resembled normal life. The cafe sat on a tree-lined street flooded with soft daylight, its glass windows reflecting passing buses and pedestrians. Jonah arrived early, dressed in his cleanest button-down shirt, hands clasped tightly as he scanned the room. He felt out of place among polished shoes and confident postures, like a man who had wandered into the wrong scene of a movie. He reminded himself it was just lunch, just a favor, nothing more. Still, his heart beat faster when the remaining seat across from him was filled by a woman whose presence subtly shifted the air around the table. Her name was Alessandra Vale, though Jonah would not understand the weight of that name until much later. In the glow of midday light, she appeared composed but not distant, her expression thoughtful rather than rehearsed. She wore professional attire softened by simple details, and there was a calm authority in the way she carried herself that suggested leadership without arrogance. To Jonah, she was simply another person at the table, someone who listened attentively and spoke with intention, someone who asked questions about community work and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. As lunch unfolded, Jonah felt something unfamiliar begin to loosen inside him. He found himself describing his work at the center, the way he enjoyed fixing things because broken objects could be restored if you took the time. He spoke of Caleb, of how daylight trips to the park had become their favorite ritual, how his son counted pigeons and believed every cracked sidewalk told a story. Jonah did not realize how rare it was for him to speak this freely, how long it had been since someone across from him had listened without pity or distraction. What Jonah did not know was that Alessandra Vale was the CEO of a rapidly growing technology firm, a woman whose days were filled with board meetings, decisions that affected hundreds of employees, and expectations that left little room for vulnerability. She had agreed to the blind date for reasons not entirely different from Jonah's. It was a favor, a pause in her routine, a small act of kindness in a life dominated by numbers and strategies. Sitting there in the brightness of the cafe, she felt something equally unexpected, a sense of grounding she had not felt in years. The truth emerged quietly without drama. A passing comment from another guest about Alessandra's company caused Jonah to freeze, the name clicking into place with sudden clarity. He realized then that the woman across from him lived in a world vastly different from his own, a world of influence and success he had never imagined entering. Embarrassment crept in, followed by the old instinct to retreat, to shrink back into the safety of anonymity. Jonah's mind raced with reasons why this connection was impossible, why he was foolish to believe he belonged at the same table. Yet the afternoon continued with a gentle steadiness. There was no judgment in Alessandra's demeanor, no shift in how she regarded him. The sunlight moved slowly across the floor, and Jonah felt an unexpected sense of relief, as though the truth had freed him from pretending to be anything other than what he was. When the luncheon ended, they parted with polite warmth, and Jonah returned to his routine, convinced that the encounter would remain a pleasant anomaly, a brief moment of connection that would fade back into memory. Days passed, filled with the rhythm of daylight tasks and responsibilities. Jonah repaired a leaking pipe at the center, attended a school meeting for Caleb, and spent afternoons at the park watching his son laugh under the open sky. Yet something had changed. There was a lightness in his step, a quiet curiosity that lingered. He found himself thinking of the way Alessandra had listened, of how being seen without explanation had felt like a gift. The unexpected continued when Alessandra visited the community center a week later, her company sponsoring a technology upgrade for local programs. Jonah saw her across the sunlit lobby, surrounded by staff members, and felt the same nervous flutter he had felt at the cafe. This time, the distance between their worlds was undeniable, yet the connection felt stronger, rooted not in status but in shared humanity. Alessandra noticed the worn floors, the aging equipment, and the people who relied on the center as a safe space. She listened to Jonah's insights, recognizing the depth of his commitment and the quiet leadership he embodied. As the weeks unfolded, their paths crossed more often, always during the day, always in settings grounded in reality rather than fantasy. They spoke about purpose, about the weight of expectations, about how loss reshaped priorities. Jonah shared the story of becoming a single father, of learning to cook simple meals and braid shoelaces, of discovering strength he did not know he possessed. Alessandra shared her own struggles, the loneliness that often accompanied success, the pressure to be unbreakable. Neither offered solutions, they offered understanding. The real challenge came when Jonah faced a choice that tested his sense of worth. A budget cut threatened his position at the center, and the fear of instability resurfaced with painful clarity. He considered withdrawing again, convinced that his life was destined to remain small and precarious. Alessandra, aware of the situation, did not step in to rescue him. Instead, she encouraged him to advocate for himself, to recognize the value of his work. Jonah stood in a sunlit meeting room, hands steady despite his racing heart, and spoke honestly about the impact of the center on families like his own. It was the first time he had truly believed his voice mattered. The outcome was not miraculous, but it was meaningful. The center retained his position, and Jonah felt a renewed sense of confidence. More importantly, he realized that his life was not defined by what he lacked, but by the love he gave and the resilience he modeled for his son. Caleb noticed the change too, his father's laughter returning, his eyes brighter during their daytime adventures. As for Alessandra, she found herself re-examining her own priorities. She began spending more time away from the office, engaging directly with community projects,